Uh, no. Okay, so it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Kim and Joe, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Yadvinda. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, good nods all round. That's great. Well, thank you so much to Yadvinda and to Carlin for inviting us to tell you about this project. And to those of you here who contributed to it, it's lovely to see so many familiar faces. And many thanks to the Oxford Martin School and the Hero Project for funding this piece of work. So Joe and I are both outdoor educators with a wonderful network of teachers and nature educators in different sites around Oxfordshire and elsewhere. And hopefully that network will grow after today. It's really interesting to see how many people are interested in this topic of engaging young people with nature. So we realised that people are at the start of working out how to do nature education with schools in particular, and we wanted to take this opportunity through Hero to bring together the expertise from this group of people. Now, Joe will tell you a little bit more about our methodology in a moment, which has been really interesting to work on with him. But first of all, I wanted to set the scene. So we all know that youth connection. I'm going to start again. We all know that nature connection in schools and with kids is diminished, particularly for teenagers. The so-called kind of nature dip, as described by Miles Richardson at Derby University. And it's really, this nature connection is diminished in two ways: relative to past generations, and for secondary school students relative to primary school students, showing that primary schools are probably doing a good job these days. And it also picks it up again in adults over around 30, presumably because lots of them have primary age kids who are going through forest school and other really fantastic initiatives. But if you keep hearing, if you work with people in nature recovery, how important it is to reconnect people with nature. And from a nature conservation and recovery perspective, we need people to understand why it's valuable, why nature is valuable, and why we need to protect it. And we need them to want to protect it. So I think it's particularly important to work with teens as well as younger children, as they will soon be voters and decision makers in society. But for those outside the kind of nature protection circles that we all move in, we need slightly stronger or different arguments. And the ones that I find work with people outside that group are these that I put on this slide here. So firstly, the future economy. We can argue that students need to understand the rapidly changing context in the economy. And I did a session for a group of MBA students yesterday, walking around university parks and popping over the bridge into Park Farm. And they were fully on board with the changes that are needed in business to adapt to the environmental issues that they see around them. And secondly, for students of all ages, learning in nature and about nature gives them really useful future skills for the future economy: observation skills, systems thinking, critical thinking, and really importantly, developing human relationships. And secondly, as students learn more about the world, their eco-anxiety grows, and there is a general mental health crisis in children, including in primary schools. And research, of course, is showing that nature connection can help mental health and well-being and help build resilience. But it isn't always clear to us how to do that on the ground, and that's where this research comes in. And thirdly, some schools are finding that they can really benefit themselves on a school context from nature in school. Nature gives students the opportunity to develop more agency in the way they engage with knowledge. And students who have purpose and meaning in their lives tend to work harder. But the experience and skills of doing this are lacking, and we know that nature educators are really keen to help. But it's not always easy to know how to engage with schools if you're not working in them. So pooling the knowledge and experience of teachers and nature educators has been a fantastic journey, and I'll hand over to Joe to explain what we did.
Thank you, Kim. So yeah, because this is a project which is really trying to bridge lots of different fields and reflect lots of different experiences, many of which are not written down, certainly not in academic writing. They're not necessarily recorded in that tangible way. And so we're trying to bring our reflections from a group of more than 30 different practitioners across research in nature and in education, a string of different kinds of educators in natural spaces, nature reserves, as well as lots and lots of teachers and other people that can kind of speak across this gap. And so we took on a co-production process or a co-design process, which is kind of roughly outlined in this diagram. And we had a series of workshops. We had 3 main workshops and some other meetings and some online asynchronous work and all of these different things with practitioners based in Oxfordshire, kind of bounding it spatially a little bit so that we can reflect on the same environment and similar education context. And we worked with them to look at the barriers and opportunities for nature education in schools. This goes right the way through the schooling system, but there is a particular focus on secondary education, as that's where we've identified this adolescent dip. And that's where, as practitioners ourselves, we notice that there's a bit more scope for impactful change. So far, we're up to about here. So we've got a draft of the paper pulled together, and we're currently seeking additional input from our collaborators, and that will be refined into a manuscript, which we will be submitting to an open access journal. The idea being that that can speak to the research community, but also be really accessible, easily shared, and quite dense for sharing among the wider community of practice. And in light of this approach that we're bringing, please do feel free to contribute through the chat and through the Q&A in this session. We haven't got so much content that we're going to fill the entire space. We've really deliberately left some space for reflection for all of us. Those will be clearly marked in the presentation, but please do feel free to use the chat box throughout. So, how far have we got so far? What are the kind of outputs that we've managed to generate? So we got lots and lots of different kinds of outputs, and many of them are on colored paper, and it's just all of these notes from our meetings. And we tried to have really free-flowing kind of ideation where we could take it right back to the beginning, say, what are the fundamentals? Why do we do this? How can we do it more effectively? What barriers do we experience from all of the different perspectives we're working across? And how can we synthesize that? So we had lots and lots of written things, but we also had some brilliant contributions spoken, kind of off the cuff by people. So I'd like to bring some of those as well, just so that you can get a sense of the kind of conversations that we've been having. So I really liked some of these, and I think it tells an interesting story. So somebody said teenagers are just not getting outdoors as part of their school day, except for games. Simultaneously, we know that going outside really supports the mental and physical well-being. So we can improve mental and physical well-being and instill respect for nature and an understanding of the role of stewardship, trying to bring together these outdoor experiences and well-being and pro-environmental behaviors. But being outside is not the same as connecting more deeply. Being out there to let off steam, do a bit of gardening is not equivalent to carefully planned nature connection, which is vital on so many levels and should be central to the curriculum for all subjects. So we're starting to see this picture come out that not only do we need to get people outdoors more, not only do we need to get them connected to nature in multiple ways, but we need to do so with intention, and we need to try and bring it in throughout the curriculum. And it's really popular. The ecology club at some of these schools, at one school in particular, it's overflowing, by far the most popular club in the school. And while it can be difficult to sustain that engagement beyond the kind of initial excitement and create something regular, there's definitely a lot of potential and a lot of interest on behalf of the pupils. We've come to this kind of broad conclusion that generating a positive attitude and a willingness to learn is what really counts here. When you've got something that's as place-based as nature, about which so much is unknown and about which so much information is available on phones and things like that, it's been my conviction for a long time, and it was lovely to hear it shared by so many people working locally, that getting that attitude is the thing that we really need to do. It doesn't matter if people can name however many different garden birds. What's more important is getting them interested enough to look up what the name is of the bird. So we've come to this idea that there's a lot about stories and about generating that attitude. And that can be cemented by letting young people create their own research questions, equipping them to investigate and present their findings, which is an extremely effective way to learn throughout the curriculum. And it's something that starts to address some of these key curriculum points that a lot of schools can find difficult to bring in with conventional nature education. Ultimately, we're hoping to sow the seeds and help students see that they matter, their voice matters in nature. This is part of the mental health and well-being component, giving people a sense of agency and allowing them to bring into the world the kind of change that they wish for. And so ultimately, it's come down to encouraging a sense of place in the world and that small can make a valuable difference. So from all of these lovely ideas and outputs and things that we've generated through the series of workshops, we've managed to synthesize those into a set of principles. Now, these principles have been agreed upon by the wider authorship list, so we're happy to share those now. And of those, we have 7. One of which is experiencing nature firsthand, addressing key issues for schools, working close to school, diversifying our views of nature, embracing co-learning, mediating with care, and working together to celebrate diversity. So we're going to break those down now and go into a little bit more detail on each point. Kim's going to present a few, and then there'll be a break for some reflections in the chat. And then I'm going to present the rest, and there'll be another break. So please do think about these critically. We would love to hear your thoughts and reflections on them. Over to you, Kim.
Thanks, Joe. And yes, do put some thoughts in the chat as we go down. There's already some interesting things in there. So yeah, I'm going to talk about experiencing nature firsthand. And this is a picture of some secondary school students from a school in Buckinghamshire who have been coming to stay at Hill End, just on the other side of Whiteham Woods. And they come into Whiteham and they've been doing some pond dipping. The school is really sort of committed to the value of taking their students outside, which I think for secondary schools is now sort of becoming more and more unusual. So within this community that we're speaking with today, it probably feels that this statement is a given. Experiencing nature firsthand is important. That getting kids into nature is key. But I think it's really important that we do keep making this point. They need to experience it, and we need them to experience it. It's been a really big plea that if we ever get this new GCSE in natural history, that it's very fieldwork based. And I think we all kind of assumed that it would be, but it feels now like there's a risk that it might be more theory and PowerPoint based in order to rush through the content. And I think hopefully there'll be a big push back against that. It's really important that students are getting outside. It opens their eyes to the real world. It anchors their learning across the curriculum in the real world. Physically allows them to use all their senses, their whole body, to actually move in a very different way and use their hands in a different way than you see them using them in sport. It builds self-confidence and their ability to navigate challenges. And being in a different space energizes those who feel kind of down in the classroom, and natural spaces tend to calm down those who are just bouncing off the walls in the classroom. So literally, it's like releasing battery chickens or cooped up cows. They're like different children. So it's really important to root their learning in reality. So secondly, it's not just about biology. Do we have the next slide? I think I'm in front of you, Joe, to put my next point up. It's not just about biology. We've heard about teachers doing Macbeth recitals under the trees, chemistry teachers explaining what's going on in the leaves or what's going on in the raindrops. We've heard about music outdoors and more. And we've got a really nice quote here from an enlightened teacher that we'll see when we get to the end of these points. Joe, I think we're a slide behind. Can we just add a bullet point?
Yeah, can you see those there? I have 3 bullets in the quote.
Oh, no, I can't.
We're only seeing one bullet point, Joe.
Ah, really? That's odd.
No, the second one just appeared. Maybe a lag. Here we are. That's
fantastic. Thank you. But it's really important to note that if you can't take students outside, and sometimes you just really can't, all sorts of things can mitigate against it. There's a really good thing to do to bring some nature indoors. There are fantastic memories that are made when the time Mr. X brought the beetle into school, and I get all sorts of clandestine requests for owl pellets and skulls and interesting things like that. And Lauren at the Botanic Gardens, who I don't think is here today, is really keen on pet plants in schools. It's an idea that I love. So if experiencing nature firsthand, either outside in the wilds of somewhere like Whiteham Woods, or just outside in the school playground, or bringing it indoors when you need to, is all really vital for this engagement that we're talking about. So on to the next slide. Thank you. Yeah, got the title there. So I think this is our most pragmatic principle, but perhaps a fairly radical suggestion, which is to work close to schools. There's a tendency, I think, for people to rush away down to the coast or something, particularly from Oxfordshire. But there are some really strong reasons for working near school. So this is another of my photos. This is Mr. Kappelman from Charwell School, very excited about bugs on Bug Day. One of the university researchers helped out with a day of bug collecting and identification. And we had sweep nets and microscopes and pitfall traps within sort of 50 yards of the school reception. And we had every year 8 class out during the day. It was great fun and quite chaotic, but lots of bugs were found and seen and identified. So why should we stay close to school? Well, one of the first points to make is that field trips are really expensive. I don't know if any of you have sort of booked a field trip recently, but it's just hundreds of pounds even just to go down the road. And unfortunately, going a bit of a further distance doesn't often cost that much more. So schools are tempted to go a long way away. But the second point to make is that nature is here. It's all around us. The perception, we don't want to give the students a perception that nature is only far away, and therefore to discount the nature that is around them all the time. The downside of heading for the hills or the coast is that we're teaching students to discount what is around them and therefore not value it, not go out into it, and not really have that continuity of connection. And my third point here is that when you show students what's around them in their local nature reserve, or even sort of on the verges on their walk to school, that local knowledge is then spread back into their families and into the community and creates more of an understanding and a caring community around the nature around them. So I'm a really strong advocate for schools staying very local, and I know a lot of nature educators sort of feel the same way. And what this allows is that we can develop relationships within schools with local experts, develop those long-term relationships, have people come into schools, have opportunities for students to go and do work experience. I take a lot of work experience students myself. Duke of Edinburgh opportunities, volunteering, family days on local reserves. It all makes those connections and brings those sort of local nature hotspots or, you know, the local park into the lives of students who may not otherwise access them. And for the local experts, it may really help to kind of remember 3 things and be savvy about the time and money constraints that schools are under. There's really no money and teachers have no time. I think that's really important to keep repeating for nature educators. You may have wonderful opportunities on your field or your piece of land. You might have created some really fantastic resources, but it really isn't worth trying to persuade a school to come unless you're consistent, you're always on time, your communications are always effective. You need to be really safeguarding aware, and you need to really understand the whole sort of risk profile of what teachers see in taking their students outside. So there's a lot of learning to be done for local educators who want to go and support schools. And the final point about why keep close to school is that we hear time and time again that repeat visits, and everybody says, oh, once a week would be fantastic for students to get outside, particularly for their mental health and well-being. So that's our second principle. So the third one, Joe.
Has that come through yet?
Yeah, can we have the first bullet? So our third principle is really about making the business case to schools or for more nature connection opportunities, whether it be on site at a local nature reserve or further afield. So costs is a big one for this. As I said before, if any of you have booked a coach recently, you've probably broken the bank. And with the teacher time, risk assessment, a need for parent volunteers, lack of teacher confidence in taking kids outside, the odds are really stacked against the keenest of teachers. And the fieldwork is literally being lost from our children's experiences, and teachers know that it is a loss. If we can help them do it locally or on site, then this can help open up the possibilities again. And the second point is that while head teachers may not be particularly concerned about nature education per se, mental health and absenteeism is something that will be occupying them, not least because dealing with it is very expensive and they have no additional budget to do so. So the idea that nature connection could be effective in helping these students is really of interest to leaders. Schools spend a great deal of time and effort supporting students who, for one reason or another, cannot access school. having effective interventions rooted in experiences of nature may not only be more effective, but can also save money in sending children elsewhere to special provision off-site. And if you can keep kids on site, it keeps the kids within the school community for the duration of any intervention, which is much better mentally for them than feeling ostracised by being sent elsewhere. And thirdly, nature connection can really help with human to human connections. We talk a lot about nature to human connections, but what I keep hearing, and we've heard within this project, is that what's really important are the human to human connections that come out of time outside. We hear about students connecting better with each other, with their teachers, and we can hear that schools sometimes feel somewhat closed off from the local community. Having a nature initiative in school, whether that be some hedge planting or having a growing garden or a new pond, as we've done at Charwell School recently, the community can be a great support and start feeling the school as a real sort of local asset and feel perhaps less fearful of going into schools. We all fear going into school because it brings back some slightly traumatic memories from the past for most of us. And schools can also use opportunities to welcome, for example, their feeder schools and to share their space and make younger and older students who have left the school feel more connected with the school community. So as you have heard, we're really keen on more voices in this piece of work. So we'd like to give you the opportunity now to put your thoughts on what we've said so far in the chat. And we'll have time for a good Q&A at the end, as Joe said. So the points we've talked about so far are experiencing nature firsthand, which hopefully is a given, working close to school, and addressing sort of the business case really for schools. So I think we're going to give you just a few minutes to think about in your own time and pop a few things into the chat. Is that okay, Joe?
Works for me.
Hope I haven't taken too much time there.
Mm-mm.
That's a very telling point, Sarah. Gets displaced by work for SATs. That's a good question, Sue. I think biscuits are the answer to volunteer groups.
Mm.
Wine is the answer for teachers for everything, and biscuits for volunteers.
And I think there's a point coming up, Sue, that will speak to this a little bit. So do let me know if you'd like me to expand on that. I'll nod to it when it comes.
So, Joe, do you want to carry on then? Because I think then people are probably going to pop things in the chat as we go forward.
Sounds good. So one of the key points that we'd like teachers to bear in mind when they're approaching this in class, but also to bring in a broader range of other educators from outside of school, is to diversify our view of nature, as any good geographer should be telling people to do. And nature is many things to many people. These ideas obviously exist within social settings, and it ties to cultural, social, and historical subjects. There are huge wealths of nature around us in school, in urban environments, in the most kind of concreted over of playgrounds. There exist small pockets of nature if we know how and where to look for them. At the same time, there's opportunities to bring in things like the colonial histories of how nature is constructed, the use of nature and different views of nature to validate or erase different land claims and things over time. And this is one of the key issues that's a little bit more elusive, but we think could really bring in interest from pupils that perhaps might not engage as much with it, or maybe more interested in the humanities and politics and things like this. And reflecting nature as a political entity, and really saying it's all around us and we all see it slightly different ways, and trying to delve into that runs right through the humanities, the arts, and things like this. We think it's a really in across the curriculum and to think with nature, whether that's biomimicry and design, biogenic drugs in biology and chemistry, arts inspired pieces of work, either from famous artists or for people to create their own in literature and the arts. There's lots and lots of different ways that we can bring these ideas into the classroom and all different kinds of classrooms, as well as taking conventional subject matter and placing it outdoors and locating it in nature. Another thing that we'd really like to look at is what can nature do for you and what can you do for nature, building that reciprocity and trying to understand humans as situated within an ecosystem, and how we interact with it, and that kind of works as a two-way relationship. Um, One of the interesting things I think about people's values of nature, the most widely held value of nature across Europe is a social aspect. People really care about green spaces as places for them to socialize with other human beings. And speaking to Kim's point earlier about how nature connection can facilitate human to human connection, it's really, really important, I think, for people to value these spaces as places for them, not just for birds or bugs or mud or whatever. Um, so showing people what they have to gain and what they might have to lose as well if it's not cared for. Moving away from this idea of the pristine nature as well and towards urban natures, indoor ecologies, pavement botany. These are things that cost far less money than driving 3 hours to a national park, and are much simpler and potentially more engaging for a wider range of pupils. Um, so one example that we saw of this tying into the curriculum and existing school structures is on visits to heritage sites, many of which have strong natural heritage components within their grounds for stately homes or within museums and things like this, and showing that humans and landscapes have been co-evolving for the entirety of human history, and understanding that is maybe a way to bring ecology into some of these other subjects and bring some of these other subjects into ecology to integrate this nature connection and engagement in the classroom. This can all be a little bit daunting, particularly for teachers that don't have a personal background in ecology or the natural sciences. And so we encourage people to embrace co-learning. So learning together, being a sort of learning coach rather than a top-down pedagogical approach, and embracing that there are always new things to be found. And we think that citizen science can provide really, really useful frameworks for that, whether it's through City Nature Challenge, iNaturalist, RSPB Big Garden Birdwatch, butterfly counts, water quality assessments. There are all these different tools out there, but there's not a lot of guidance on how to access them. And so one of our principles of embracing co-learning is to encourage people to learn alongside their class and to guide each other on that journey, which is difficult. We understand that that's difficult, but there are some useful frameworks out there that can perhaps help with that. Working towards what's described as a vulnerable pedagogy, not framing oneself as the expert, who's beyond question, but instead as both being on this learning journey together. And this is something that we really see come through in this idea of focusing on the attitude rather than the specifics. You don't have to know the name of every bird that you see. You don't even need to know what it's doing. But if you can cultivate in people the interest to find out, that in itself is a really, really valuable teaching and learning experience. And this kind of experiential learning is a huge part of why we encourage people to get outdoors and in nature, but also to cultivate these relationships with other educators, specialist educators. This is something I used to do when I was working for the RSPB, based on a nature reserve and visiting urban schools, and also delivering CPD to many of these teachers. And that relationship, it helped me do my job better. And the feedback from the teachers was really strong, that they would gain that confidence, even to see how their class responds outside, kind of in the hands of somebody who's more comfortable and experienced with taking them outdoors in challenging conditions, and picking up little tips and tricks and things like that along the way. So co-learning between educators on how to improve their practice and integrate this experience of nature for the young people in question. But this really is underpinned by supporting teachers, and this is something that needs to come from multiple levels. And a huge benefit to engaging students outside of a traditional classroom setting. With that in mind, it's really important that we mediate these experiences with care. The intention behind it is really, really fundamental. It's very much possible to be in nature but not connecting with it. And we suggest here a really constructive and positive view on that. And that might mean that your first session outside isn't litter picking in a local park, because that's not necessarily going to lead people towards having a positive outlook towards being outside and spending time in nature, but it's something that can be built towards. And looking at these kind of active relationships with nature, which are led partly by student interest, we think is really, really fundamental to how people can connect with it most effectively. And in doing that, we need to be phobia friendly, check comfort levels, make sure that people aren't wet and cold, and that, nobody knows necessarily what they're going to be scared of until it happens. And so having that patience and encouraging that within the group is another way to build these human-human connections. One thing that I see often with teachers who are used to working in the classroom is that they are not particularly relaxed outside because there's a whole new set of challenges and a whole new set of benefits that they might not be familiar with. So just reminding people to take that responsibility very seriously, but to also take a moment to enjoy it and appreciate that it's a more experiential way of learning that may seem less controlled at points. Building that trust with the class and a sense of kind of dynamic risk management rather than trying to anticipate anything that could go wrong, and act in that kind of more anxious way. See what's happening and make sure that you're preventing issues before they arise, but learn to trust the class and build that relationship where you can have a kind of interaction with nature that can be a little bit more student-led. Safeguarding is another issue that changes with taking people outside of the classroom. Sometimes different concerns arise. So remaining really vigilant and prepared for that, because it sometimes takes teachers by surprise as well. So this point that it's possible to be in nature and not connect with it. And finally, working together and celebrating diversity. So everybody has an opportunity to make some kind of positive change for nature, whether that's in school or in their community, but we need to work together. There's a whole host of different roles to suit different skill sets. And as an intersectional subject with many different topics, we can bridge some of these gaps and find something that works for everybody. Find something that can bring sustenance and support to every learner's journey and every teacher's as well, using the head, hands, and heart as many different ways to connect. So as one of our co-researchers said, there are always opportunities. Trigonometry on trees, growing food, collecting things to measure, describe, and draw, discussing the interconnectedness of it all. So we think that that's a really, really important point, and that's how we round off our set of principles. With that, I'd like to leave another minute or so of space for people to add their thoughts in the chat.
Thanks, Joe. Can you go back to that previous slide?
Yeah.
You're the working together one. Thanks. So those kids there are from Charwell. That's Fraser, Toby, and Emil, and they're planting a tree. And I got to know them, at least Toby, through White and Woods, who did sort of an outdoor education activity with me there. And now here they are in school in year 8. So they are 12 years old, and they're fantastic. They know so much about nature, and they're very keen on planting trees. Thanks, Joe.
No problem.
Do you want to go to the next? Yeah, again.
Yeah, I mean, I suggest we move forward and get to Q&A, and then people can keep on adding comments in chat. I think perhaps
No problem.
to allow enough time for some shared questions at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so our conclusions so far for this work are threefold, really. Just very quickly, I mean, nature can certainly be integrated into schooling, but you have to be clever about it. There are identifiable benefits, but we need to keep telling senior leaders in schools what these are. And that with a bit of support for students and teachers, this can really release a huge potential for the benefits for schools and for people. So, Joe, next steps.
Yeah, so our next steps on the paper will be to finalize the text along with our co-researchers, and then submit it for publication, hopefully get it out in the world and start disseminating some of the learning that we've certainly experienced as a collective. I think we've all learned a lot from each other's experiences, and to synthesize that into something that can be used by schools feels really, really important to us, and hopefully something that will feel significant to the schools as well. So we'll finish on this quote that nature is vital on so many levels and should be central to the curriculum for all subjects. We hope that our principles can be a bit of a roadmap to some schools to try that, but we would love to hear what you think. So with that, we'll open it for questions.
Thank you, Joe and Kim. If you stop sharing your screen, it'd be easier to see the audience. So do raise your hand if you want to ask a question. I'll just kick off with a couple of questions while people are thinking of some. Firstly, beyond, it sounds like you've got an academic paper planned, which is fantastic. Beyond that, what are your means? There's some really fantastic nuances and insights in there. And what other ways are you thinking of disseminating this? I think there's an opportunity for perhaps some really creative ways, whether it's a pamphlet, whether it's a short video or something like that. There seem to be some interesting learnings there. And my second question was actually, what most surprised you in this exercise? And what did you learn that you didn't already know from your experiences as educators? Were there any particular insights that emerged?
I mean, to the first one, Yadvinder, so part of the paper we're hoping will be a kind of almost like an audit checklist for teachers, so it can be a very practical takeaway, which will then circulate through our networks, but very open to other ideas.
Have you partnered with the National Education Nature Park at all? Because I think they might be an interesting vehicle to disseminate some of these things across their network of schools.
Yeah, they've been really fantastic, aren't they, about collecting resources and things. So yeah, hopefully maybe it could find its way onto their database of resources.
And surprise, anything you want to add to that?
I don't think I've spent so much time with people talking about this. I don't think I was surprised by anything, actually. No. It was just good to put it all together. Joe?
One thing which surprised me a little bit was the popularity of the Ecology Club. And in my experience, I've been trying to bring those into schools, and often teachers have said we don't think it would be that popular necessarily, or would be very popular with a small subset of the school population, but that there is that interest there already waiting to be tapped, and in a kind of after school club capacity. I think that's really, really promising, and something that I was a bit surprised about, to know that's kind of waiting and doesn't need as much bringing out as I thought it might have done.
Fantastic. Okay, we'll go up to questions. Sue?
Thanks. I thank you about the co-learning thing. I can just feel the absolute terror you must have as a teacher. I mean, I did a zoology PhD, but I've never been a good naturalist. And I've been quite frightened of going out into the wild with people and displaying my ignorance. So the idea of encouraging them to understand that they don't need to be the experts when they're trying to teach the children, which is so different from how you would be in anything else you're trying to do with the children, where you always are the expert. One way around this is this new way of thinking about our connectedness with nature. So I do hug my tree every time I go for a walk and feel its pulse and do that kind of what people call spiritual aspect to things. And I don't need to know the name of that tree. I just need to know that it is part of me and I am part of it. And that's really great that you're thinking about these sorts of things. That's just a comment.
No, that's really appreciated. And actually, in terms of the terror, I do quite a lot of co-design work with schools. And often that's me coming in as the facilitator to work with the class and with the teacher, and to see the relief that it doesn't matter, that you don't have to have the answer to every question, that you can find those answers together. You can generate new questions together. What it opens is a lot more, I think, rewarding than the slightly daunting aspect of breaking this wall. And I think that contemporary teacher training is starting to break that down a bit as well. It's less fashionable to have the kind of empty vessel approach where the teacher knows everything and the students receive it all. And there's much more relational interaction is becoming a bit more normal in certain areas. It definitely suits some subjects more than others.
Yeah, I'm much more a kind of, oh, that's interesting, let's find out what that is together than trying to pretend that I know what I'm talking about. Sarah.
Sarah?
I've spent over 20 years actually maintaining a little wildlife patch next door to Blaydon School, and it's never had any pesticides added to it. And we really don't know what's there. And we tell the children, you might find anything if you look carefully, and go around with a partner and see what you can discover, and then bring it back to us, and we'll all talk about it and see what we feel about it. And you don't have to know names. And I think Sue is absolutely right there, Sue Roberts, that a lot of the terror is to do with the names and the feeling that you don't know the names.
Yeah. I used to argue with the RSPB management about this a lot of the time. They had targets set on certain number of garden birds, and I think with the plethora of apps and things like that that are available now to help with the identification, you don't even have to decenter it. You can still say identification is important and these technical skills are important, but the teachers don't need to necessarily have them themselves to bring people outside. And so some of these established citizen science bio blitzes and things like that, really good way to take people out to somewhere that they might not know anything. Nobody knows what's in this patch of land that you're talking about. And so let's find out together and learn how science works in that kind of way. It's something really exciting to me. So
I think the main skill now really is about how to be nice to kids, particularly teenagers. I think that's one of the most fearful things for sort of nature educators as opposed to teachers. It's just how to engage with teenagers constructively, which is a fun thing to do when you work out how to do it.
Okay, Wendy?
And Joe, thanks for the amazing talks. I think before you're gonna throw cabbage at me, I want to ask this questions like when take the kids out to the nature, do this kind of like recommendation in the current curricula, we're gonna have more specific recommendation on top of this. Is like for these schools, we find out take the children to the wildlife side, or it's like the neighborhood park, or just like with doing something in the school grounds. Is all useful, or is there a like this park people don't go to? I think there's obviously a lot of local knowledge, but wondering is there different roles? So like saying 1 hour in the wildlife side, they're gonna make it, or go to the Oxford Botanical Garden, for instance, something like that.
I think that all of those offer different things, and this is where bringing it in throughout the curriculum can be really useful, because if it's summertime and you're doing, English literature and you can sit in the school grounds and you happen to have some nice trees to sit under, there's a form of connection in that which is very, very different from going somewhere like the Botanic Gardens. And so I wouldn't want to be too prescriptive about that. I think it's good to leave that to the judgment of schools to reflect on their own circumstances, their own pupils, which specific curriculum objectives they're meeting and which they might be meeting in other ways already. So I would say that it can be a bit looser and let the teachers do that part of their job as they see fit, but just to encourage them to say, hey, it's still a nature activity if you're looking at the lichens that grow on the paving slabs in the playground, and kind of open that as a possibility. Hopefully that makes their jobs easier instead of harder.
Okay. Great, Victoria?
Hello. So one of the things that I think is extraordinarily helpful about nature when you're relating to a generation of people who've become very connected with the internet and their phones and all the rest of it, is that you can, if you can get them to look beyond that and at a bigger scale, they understand that there's this sort of enormous interconnectedness. You're getting them to sort of look out at the sort of the bigger scheme of things. And I think in mental health terms, that's something that could be extraordinarily helpful. And you don't have to be able to stand and look at a massive landscape, which I have to say gives me enormous pleasure. I was talking to a farmer the other day who was trying to put back some hedges on his farm. And he said something incredibly simple, but it was just so brilliant. He said, I didn't know where to put these hedges, so I looked beyond my own farm and I joined up the ones that were around my farm, which just ticks so many boxes. And it struck me that he's probably very unusual that he was thinking like that. And I think that would be that sort of is just something that would be a very good conceptually to get across to a younger generation. And I think it would help to make them feel more grounded and understand the interconnectedness of the world. So that's just a sort of impression, but that's some of the things I gain from looking at nature.
Yes, and I think
before you respond, Martha, did you have your hand up as well? I thought maybe you had a comment, and then Joe and Kim could.
I did. I was yes, just briefly. It's I was thinking about the activities that we do in nature, and just echoing what Catherine Villiers has just put in the comments. Actually, I was thinking, does it? There's this emphasis on connection with nature, but does it matter like what we're doing outside? Like I find it a bit sad thinking that I know that being outside and just running around might not be the same as connecting with nature, but I suppose that point about how much does it have to be about connecting with nature rather than just being in nature?
Yeah. And I think this maybe addresses both of those points together. The term that we're choosing to use in the report is nature engagement. And that's intentionally a bit vague in that it can be about bringing nature into certain topics, and that can be sitting outside to sketch for an art class. But it can also be looking at biomimicry and design in the classroom and not going outside. It's really bringing that in or bringing the lessons out. And I think that helps people understand themselves as situated within their ecosystem and can help people connect without necessarily having to go to these large, spectacular landscapes, even to sit and watch a magpie in the school grounds for a few minutes and think, what's it trying to do? What are its motivations? What are its limitations? I find that to be a really engaging exercise. And it's amazing what young people come out with about that. I remember talking about snags and standing deadwood and explaining how that verticality brings a lot more habitat to even a small area. And I remember one of the students said, oh, so it's like a block of flats. And that's an analogy that I've kept with me and that I find really, really useful. And I think that when we give them the chance to do that and try and frame it in terms that can be related to, that's where that co-learning and that relationality really comes in. And it's amazing what people have to offer given the opportunity and the kind of given a stake in their own learning. So I'm not sure if that speaks that well to the previous question, but I hope it comes some way to answering it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Great. We're on the hour, so I think we should wrap up there. But thank you to Kim and Joe for really insightful and thoughtful. And I love the levels of nuance to this as well. I think it's for many of us, it was a much deeper exploration of exactly what we're trying to get to with the nature connection and how best to get there, but also the broadening our understanding and definitions of that. So I really look forward to seeing your draft paper at some point and the published paper shared as well. Before we go, I just thought, as Wendy's here, maybe Wendy, very briefly, you want to advertise your talk next month, what you're going to be talking about?
Okay, so next month I will be talking on kind of follow the lens of what Joe and Kim were talking about today. Working with Kim, but we're gonna using some data. The Oxwell, it's a survey data called Oxwell survey data. So looking at school greenness and chronic absenteeism, and then their mental well-being. So we have around 168 schools with data in the Oxfordshire, Liverpool, and the Buckinghamshire. We link how green the school grounds is, and then to the survey data like collected in 2023, and then to using some data to reflect it. How does this actually make a difference, or does it not make a difference for the analysis? So that's going to be the talk. Thank you.
Right, thank you. I think your volume was fading in and out for some reason, but the gist of that was Wendy's going to present some actual data around the link between school, or at least the project plans around analysing these data and the links between school greenness and well-being outcomes for kids in school. So that should be a nice complement, a geospatial analysis type complement to what we heard today. So I look forward to that. Okay. We should wrap up now. So wonderful to see you all. A reminder again of the event on Friday, if you're interested in the Otmore Burnwood landscape. and do sign up on the mailing list if you want to, if you're new here and you want to keep engaged with that. And Carlin will send round a non-private link to that video on the Hero project, so do look out for that as well. And great to see you all. Have a lovely month.
Thanks very much for having us. Cheers.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.